This story is titled, My Daughter Said I Wasn't Supportive and Banned Me from Her Wedding. So I froze my cards, and now she's in debt. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps me bring you even more awesome content like this. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, I never thought I'd be in this position. I worked so hard to give my daughter, Claire, the life she deserved after everything fell apart when her mom and I divorced. She was 12 when Stephanie and I split up, and even though it wasn't an ugly divorce, it was still hard on Claire. Stephanie remarried within a year and had 3 more kids in quick succession, first a baby girl and then twin boys. While Stephanie moved on to a new chapter of her life, Claire was left feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. At first, I didn't see it for what it was. I thought maybe Claire just needed time to adjust to the changes. But as time went on, it became clear that she felt pushed aside, like she'd been replaced in her mother's life. To make things worse, Stephanie wasn't exactly subtle about her priorities. Most of her attention went to the new kids, and Claire was often left to fend for herself emotionally. I knew I had to step up. I made it my mission to be Claire's rock. I took on extra hours at work to make sure I could give her what she needed. I showed up to every game, every parent-teacher meeting, and every little milestone. I was determined to be the constant in her life, the one person she could always rely on. I thought I was doing everything right, but looking back now, I wonder if I overdid it. Maybe I protected her too much, gave her too much, and never let her learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. Things started to unravel when Claire decided to take a 2-year break from high school. She said she needed time to figure herself out. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I wanted to support her. Not every kid follows the same timeline, right? Some kids take longer to find their path, and that's okay. Or at least that's what I told myself. But what started as a break to find herself quickly turned into a free pass to do nothing. Instead of focusing on her sports or exploring new interests, Claire spent her days watching TV, scrolling through her phone, and hanging out with friends I didn't trust. These weren't the type of friends who'd encourage her to grow or push her to do better. They were aimless, just like she was becoming. I tried talking to her about it, but every conversation ended in an argument. If I so much as hinted that she needed to get her act together, she'd explode, accusing me of not understanding her or not supporting her. It felt like I was walking on eggshells every day, trying to balance being supportive while also trying to steer her in the right direction. The breaking point came one night when she tried to sneak out after I'd gone to bed. I caught her climbing out her bedroom window, and when I confronted her, she screamed at me like I was the villain in her story. She didn't see that I was trying to protect her. She only saw me as the obstacle in her way. That night, I sat down and really thought about where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too lenient? Had I given her too much freedom? Or was it something else entirely? Something I couldn't control, like the impact of the divorce or her feeling abandoned by her mom? Desperate to help her, I turned to therapy. Claire started seeing a therapist, and for a while I thought it was helping. She seemed calmer, more willing to talk about her feelings. But then she'd quit therapy as soon as it started getting uncomfortable. This cycle went on for years. Therapy, quitting, acting out, and then therapy again. I tried everything else I could think of too. Late night talks, family trips, even bribes. I bought her the latest gadgets, thinking they might motivate her to focus on school or sports. I took her on vacations, hoping a change of scenery might reset her mindset. Nothing worked. Finally, after 2 long years, Claire agreed to go back to school. I was relieved. No, I was overjoyed. I thought we'd finally turned a corner. I thought she was ready to take her life seriously and start building a future for herself. For a brief moment, I felt like all the stress and heartache of the past 2 years had been worth it. But that relief didn't last long. Not even 6 months after returning to school, Claire met Jake. Jake was 26, a delivery guy for his parents' bakery. He'd dropped out of high school in the 9th grade and had been coasting through life ever since. His idea of ambition was seeing where the road takes me. At first, I didn't want to judge him too harshly. Honest work is honest work, and not everyone's cut out for college. But as their relationship got more serious, I started to see the cracks in his facade. Jake wasn't just aimless, he was reckless. He'd been married once before when he was 21. That marriage lasted 6 months before he and his wife split up because it just wasn't working. It didn't take a genius to see that this guy wasn't ready for a serious commitment, let alone marriage. Claire, of course, saw none of this. To her, Jake was perfect. He was charming and funny, and he made her feel special in a way she hadn't felt in years. I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to trust her judgment, but everything about their relationship set off alarm bells in my head. Then, out of nowhere, Claire announced they were getting married. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't a request for advice. It was a statement of fact. She'd already set the date and started planning the wedding, all without telling me. When I tried to talk to her about it, she shut me down. "You're just jealous because I'm happy," she said. I didn't know what to say. How do you argue with someone who's blinded by love? How do you convince your child that they're making a mistake when they're convinced they know better? That night, I sat in the living room alone, staring at the walls, wondering where I'd gone wrong. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made for Claire, all the times I'd put her needs above my own, and all the ways I'd tried to be the best father I could be. And now, here I was, watching her run headfirst into disaster, unable to stop her. It was the first time I realized that no matter how much you love your child, you can't protect them from their own choices. The day Claire announced she was getting married felt like a punch to the gut. She didn't sit me down or ask for advice. She just dropped the news casually over dinner, as if she was talking about what movie she wanted to watch. "Jake and I are getting married next month," she said, smiling like she just shared the best news in the world. For a second, I thought she was joking. "What do you mean married?" I asked, hoping I'd misheard her. "We're in love," she said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "We've already picked a date and everything." I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My 19-year-old daughter, who still hadn't finished high school and had no job, was planning to marry a guy she'd only been dating for a few months. A guy who had no ambition, no stability, and no plan for his future. "Claire, don't you think this is a little rushed?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Marriage is a big decision. Have you thought this through?" She rolled her eyes. "Dad, you always overthink everything. Jake and I are soulmates. We don't need your approval." That hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd always been the parent she could rely on, the one who supported her through everything. And now she was telling me my opinion didn't matter. I tried to reason with her. "Claire, you're still so young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Why not take some time to focus on school and your future first? Marriage can wait." Her expression turned cold. "You're just being negative. I knew you wouldn't support me." That's when I realized how serious she was. This wasn't a phase or a rebellion. She was genuinely convinced that this was the right decision, and no matter what I said, she wasn't going to listen. Over the next few days, I tried to talk to her about it again, but every conversation ended in an argument. I brought up practical concerns, like how they were going to support themselves. "Do you have a plan for finances? Where are you going to live? How are you going to pay rent or utilities?" She brushed it off like none of it mattered. "We'll figure it out," she said. "Love is all we need." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Claire, love is important, but it doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't put food on the table. Marriage isn't just about romance. It's about responsibility." She rolled her eyes again. "You're stuck in the past, Dad. Things are different now. You don't understand." I wanted to scream. How could she not see what a mistake this was? How could she be so blind to the reality of what she was getting herself into? Things came to a head when I asked to meet Jake. I figured if I couldn't get through to Claire, maybe I could talk some sense into him. We arranged to meet at a local diner, and I tried to keep an open mind. Jake seemed nice enough on the surface, polite, friendly, even a little charming. But as we talked, it became clear that he had no idea what he was getting into. "What's your plan for the future?" I asked him, trying to keep my tone neutral. He shrugged. "We'll figure it out as we go." I clenched my jaw to keep from losing my temper. Marriage isn't something you can just figure out. It takes planning and preparation. Do you have any savings? A budget? A long-term goal? He just nodded along, like he was listening, but I could tell he wasn't really paying attention. I tried a different approach. "Claire's still in school and she doesn't have a job. Are you prepared to support her financially until she gets on her feet?" His answer? "We'll manage. Love is more important than money." That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to work. Jake wasn't a bad guy, but he was completely unprepared for the reality of marriage. And Claire, who was already struggling to find her footing, was diving headfirst into a situation that would only make things harder for her. When I got home that night, I sat Claire down and tried to talk to her again. I told her about my concerns and asked her to reconsider. "Claire, I'm not trying to control your life," I said. "I just want what's best for you. Can't you see that this isn't the right time for you to get married? You have so much potential, so many opportunities ahead of you. Why rush into something like this?" Her response was ice cold. "If you can't support me, then I don't want you at my wedding." Those words hit me like a knife to the chest. "Claire, you don't mean that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I do," she said firmly. "You're not invited if you're just going to be negative. I don't want your bad energy ruining my big day. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own daughter was banning me from her wedding because I didn't agree with her decision. That night, I made a decision. If she didn't want me at her wedding, I wasn't going to pay for it. Claire had been planning the whole thing on my dime, using the credit card I'd given her for emergencies. I froze the card the next morning. It didn't take long for her to notice. Within hours, she was blowing up my phone, screaming that I'd ruined everything. "How could you do this to me?" she yelled. "You're trying to sabotage my happiness." I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "Claire, if you're old enough to make adult decisions, you're old enough to handle the consequences. If you don't want me at your wedding, I'm not going to pay for it." Her response was exactly what I expected. She called me selfish, controlling, and heartless. She said I didn't care about her happiness and accused me of trying to ruin her life. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I loved Claire more than anything, but I couldn't keep enabling her bad decisions. If she wanted to act like an adult, she needed to learn what it meant to take responsibility for her actions. As much as it hurt, I knew I was doing the right thing. After freezing Claire's credit card, I knew things would only escalate. I didn't want it to come to this, but I wasn't about to bankroll a wedding I wasn't welcome at. That line was clear to me. If I wasn't invited, neither was my money. Claire didn't take it well. She stormed into the house that night, her face red with anger. "How could you do this to me, Dad?" she shouted as soon as she walked through the door. I stood my ground. "Claire, I've supported you your entire life. I've been there for everything, even when you didn't want me to be. But I'm not going to fund a wedding I'm not allowed to attend. That's not how this works." "You're just being selfish," she screamed. "You don't care about my happiness. You just want control over my life." Her words stung, but I stayed calm. "No, Claire, I care about your future. That's why I'm saying no. If you're old enough to make adult decisions, then you're old enough to deal with adult consequences." She stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. For the next few days, we barely spoke. She avoided me as much as possible, only coming out of her room to grab food or leave the house. The tension was suffocating, but I wasn't going to back down. I decided it was time to call for reinforcements. Claire had always been close to her grandmother, my mom, and I hoped she might have better luck talking some sense into her. My mom, Evelyn, is a no-nonsense woman in her 70s, who's never been afraid to speak her mind. She raised me with tough love, and I thought maybe that was what Claire needed right now. When I explained the situation to my mom, she sighed deeply. "That girl is just like her mother," she said. "Stubborn as a mule and too proud to admit when she's wrong. But I'll talk to her." We set up a family meeting, with my mom leading the conversation. Claire sat across from us, her arms crossed and her face set in a scowl. My mom didn't waste any time getting to the point. "Claire, marriage isn't just about love," she began. "It's about commitment, responsibility, and planning. Have you and Jake thought about any of that? How are you going to support yourselves? Do you have savings? A budget? A plan for the future?" Claire rolled her eyes. "We'll figure it out, Grandma. Times have changed. It's not like it was in your day." My mom's expression hardened. "You think times have changed, but the basics haven't. Love doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't keep a roof over your head or food on the table. You need a solid foundation to build a life together. And from what your dad's told me, you and Jake don't have that." Claire stayed silent, her arms still crossed. My mom went on, sharing stories about her own struggles when she and my dad first got married. She talked about the sacrifices they made, the financial hardships they faced, and how they had to work together to build a stable life. "Marriage isn't a fairy tale, Claire," she said. "It's hard work, and if you're not ready for that, it'll fall apart faster than you can imagine." Claire finally spoke, her voice cold and defiant. "You don't understand. Jake and I know what we're doing. We love each other, and that's all that matters." My mom shook her head. "You're making a mistake, and you're too stubborn to see it. But if you won't listen to me or your dad, then maybe you need to learn the hard way." With that, she stood up and left the room. I could see the frustration in her eyes, and I knew she felt just as helpless as I did. As much as I wanted to believe Claire would come to her senses, deep down, I knew she wouldn't. After I froze the credit card, she and Jake found a way to move forward with their wedding. When she came home one evening and slammed the door behind her, I didn't even need to ask. "We took out a loan," she announced, her voice laced with defiance. "You think you can stop this wedding? Guess what, Dad? It's happening whether you like it or not." I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she'd just said. "You took out a loan? Claire, do you even realize what you've done? You're barely an adult and now you're in debt before you've even started your life." "Don't lecture me," she snapped. "We're doing what we have to. Not that you care, since you abandoned me when I needed you the most. The way she twisted the narrative made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. Claire, I didn't abandon you. You pushed me out. You banned me from your wedding. Don't turn this around on me. She rolled her eyes and stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. It was clear there was no getting through to her. A week later, the wedding took place. I wasn't invited, of course, but my neighbor Lily filled me in on the details. Lily's daughter was one of Claire's childhood friends, and she had attended the wedding out of obligation. It was okay, I guess, Lily told me when we bumped into each other at the grocery store. They had a small venue, some flowers, and even a live band, but you could tell the whole thing was thrown together at the last minute. She hesitated for a moment before adding, Jake's parents didn't look happy. They were polite, but you could see it all over their faces. They think this is a bad idea too. Hearing that didn't make me feel any better. I'd hoped that Jake's parents might have been able to talk some sense into him, but apparently they were just as powerless as I was. On the day of the wedding, I stayed home, trying to distract myself. I told myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't worth getting upset over. But deep down, I was heartbroken. Every father dreams of walking his daughter down the aisle, of seeing her start a new chapter in her life surrounded by love and support. Instead, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the walls and wondering where it all went wrong. Before Claire left for the ceremony, I slipped a note into her room. It wasn't much, just a few words wishing her the best and hoping she'd find happiness, even if I didn't agree with her choices. As much as I was against this wedding, I couldn't bring myself to wish ill on my own daughter. No matter how much she'd hurt me, I still wanted the best for her. A couple of months passed after the wedding, and things were quiet. Claire moved out of the house and into a small apartment with Jake. She didn't call, didn't visit, didn't even text. The silence was painful, but I told myself it was for the best. She needed to figure things out on her own, and I couldn't keep bailing her out every time she made a bad decision. Then, one evening, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Jake standing there. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment before stepping aside and letting him in. "What's going on?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Jake sat down on the couch and rubbed his hands together nervously. "We're struggling," he admitted. "The loan payments are more than we expected, and rent's gone up. I've picked up extra shifts, but it's not enough. Claire's been applying for jobs, but, I knew exactly what he meant. Claire was a high school dropout with no real work experience. The kind of jobs she could get weren't going to pay much, and knowing her, she was probably being picky about what she was willing to do. We're behind on everything. Rent, utilities, the loan payments," Jake continued. "We're drowning, and I don't know what to do. I was hoping maybe you could help us out, just until we get back on our feet." I leaned back in my chair, staring at him. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. He looked like he was genuinely struggling, and I could tell he was desperate. But another part of me couldn't forget the arrogance he'd shown when I'd tried to talk to him before the wedding. "Jake," I said, my voice steady, "when you and Claire decided to get married, you told me that love was all you needed. That money didn't matter. Do you still believe that?" He looked down at his hands, avoiding my gaze. "I was wrong," he muttered. I nodded. "I'm sorry you're struggling, but I can't help you. This is your mess, and you need to figure out how to fix it." Jake looked like I'd just punched him in the gut. "You won't even help a little? Just enough to get us through this rough patch?" "No," I said firmly. "Claire made it very clear that she didn't want me involved in her life. If that's how she feels, then I'm respecting her wishes." He sat there for a moment, his shoulders slumped, before finally standing up. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thanks anyway." As he walked to the door, I felt a pang of guilt, but I reminded myself that this was the only way they'd learn. If I bailed them out now, they'd never take responsibility for their decisions. That night, Claire called me for the first time since the wedding. She was furious. "How could you turn Jake away like that?" she yelled. "He came to you in good faith and you humiliated him." I sighed, already exhausted from the conversation I knew was coming. "Claire, you're the one who wanted me out of your life. You can't expect me to step in now just because things aren't going the way you planned." "You're heartless," she screamed. "You don't care about me at all." I stayed calm. "I care about you more than you realize. That's why I'm letting you face the consequences of your actions. This is what adulthood looks like, Claire. It's not all romance and fairy tales. It's hard work, and it's responsibility." She hung up on me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. Update 1 point. A few weeks after Jake showed up at my door and Claire called me in a rage, I thought the dust had settled. Claire wasn't speaking to me, And I didn't try to reach out to her either. I figured she needed space to figure things out, and I wasn't going to push. As much as it hurt to see her struggling, I knew she had to learn this lesson on her own. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed. It was a string of frantic texts from Claire. "Dad, are you awake? Please, I need to talk to you. I don't know what to do." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. My first thought was that something had happened to Jake. Maybe an accident or an emergency. I called her immediately. "Claire, what's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. There was a long pause on the other end, and when she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. "I think I might be pregnant." I froze. Out of all the things I'd expected her to say, this wasn't one of them. "Are you sure?" I asked. "No," she admitted. "But I'm late and I have a feeling." She was crying now, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "Dad, we can't handle this. We're already behind on rent and bills. How are we supposed to take care of a baby?" I wanted to say, "This is what you signed up for," but I couldn't bring myself to be that harsh. No matter how much Claire had hurt me, she was still my daughter, and she was scared. "Okay," I said gently. "The first step is to confirm it. I'll schedule a doctor's appointment for you tomorrow. Until then, take a deep breath and try not to panic." The next morning, I called a local clinic and set up an appointment for Claire. She was nervous the whole way there, biting her nails and fidgeting in the passenger seat. When we got to the clinic, I waited in the car while she went inside. About 30 minutes later, she came out and slid into the seat without saying a word. "What did they say?" I asked. "They want me to wait a week before taking another test," she said quietly. "It's too early to tell for sure." For the next week, Claire was a nervous wreck. She barely slept and spent most of her time pacing around the apartment she shared with Jake. She texted me constantly, asking for advice or just needing reassurance. I could tell she was terrified, and for the first time in months, she actually wanted my support. During one of our conversations, she brought up Jake. "Dad, do you think you could hire him at your agency? Just for a little while until we get back on our feet?" I run a small business, a creative agency that requires a specific set of skills. Jake didn't have those skills, and to be honest, I doubted he had the work ethic to learn them. But Claire was desperate, and I could feel the pressure building. "Let's wait for the results of your test," I told her. "We'll figure things out after that." But she wasn't satisfied. "You're just making excuses," she snapped. "Why can't you ever help when I need you?" Her accusations stung, but I held my ground. "Claire, I'm not going to make a decision until we know what we're dealing with. Let's take this one step at a time." Thankfully, the pregnancy scare turned out to be just that, a scare. When Claire got the results of her second test, she wasn't pregnant. I thought the relief might humble her, but instead, it seemed to make her even more defiant. "You wouldn't even hire Jake," she said bitterly during one of our arguments. "What kind of father doesn't help his daughter when she's struggling?" I sighed. "Claire, I've done nothing but try to help you your entire life, but you've made it clear that you don't want me involved. You can't have it both ways." She crossed her arms and glared at me. "You know, everything you have is going to be mine one day. You could at least act like you care about my future." Her words floored me. "Claire, nothing is guaranteed. You think you're entitled to everything I've worked for? That's not how it works. I might retire early, or travel, or even get married again. What I leave behind is up to me, not you." Her face twisted in anger. "You're selfish," she spat. "You don't care about anyone but yourself." I didn't even argue. There was no point. Over the next few weeks, our relationship grew colder. Claire stopped calling, and when I tried to reach out, she ignored me. I could feel the distance growing between us, and it broke my heart. I thought about giving in, sending her money or offering to help Jake find a job, but I knew it would only make things worse. Claire needed to learn the hard way. She needed to understand that her actions had consequences, and that she couldn't keep relying on me to bail her out. But that didn't make it any easier. Every day I thought about calling her, about trying to mend the rift between us. But I knew that as long as she refused to take responsibility for her choices, nothing would change. A few days ago, I got a call from my ex-wife, Stephanie. She was furious. "How could you let Claire struggle like this?" she demanded. "She's your daughter. You're supposed to help her." I took a deep breath before responding. "Stephanie, I've been helping Claire her whole life, but this isn't about me anymore. She made her choices, and now she has to live with them." Stephanie wasn't satisfied. "You're ruining her life," she snapped. "No," I said firmly. "Claire is in charge of her own life now. If she wants things to change, she needs to take responsibility for herself." Stephanie hung up on me, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. I hated that things had come to this, but I didn't see any other way. Every day I hope that Claire will come around. I hope she'll see that I was only trying to protect her, that everything I did was out of love. But until that day comes, all I can do is wait. Update 2.0. A few months passed in silence. Claire and I weren't speaking, and any updates I got about her life came through our neighbor, Lily, or her few remaining friends. Most people had stopped reaching out to Claire because of her stubbornness and unwillingness to listen to advice. It was hard to watch her isolate herself, but I reminded myself that I needed to let her face the consequences of her decisions. Then, one evening, I got another late-night call. This time, it wasn't Claire. It was Jake. "Hey, Mr. Carter," he started, his voice shaky. "I know we haven't talked much since, well, you know, but I wanted to tell you that Claire isn't doing so great." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean? Is she okay?" "She's just really stressed. The bills are piling up, and she hasn't been able to find a job. We're fighting a lot. I don't know what to do anymore." For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But then I reminded myself that this was the situation they had chosen. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "But Jake, you two decided to get married against everyone's advice. You took out a loan to fund a wedding you couldn't afford. You both knew what you were getting into." "I know," he said quietly. "But I thought we could handle it. I didn't realize how hard it would be." Jake's call stayed on my mind for the rest of the week. As much as I wanted to step in and fix everything, I knew I couldn't. Claire and Jake needed to learn to navigate their own problems without relying on me. Then, out of the blue, Claire texted me. "I need to talk to you," she wrote. I called her immediately, and for the first time in months, she answered. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Jake and I are thinking about moving back in with his parents. We can't afford the apartment anymore, and we're falling behind on everything. I don't know what to do." This was the most vulnerable I'd heard Claire in a long time. For a moment, I considered offering to let them move back in with me, but then I thought about how things had played out the last time I tried to help her. She didn't want my advice or my rules. She just wanted my resources. "Have you talked to Jake's parents about it?" I asked instead. "Yeah," she said, her voice small. "They said we could move into their basement, but I don't want to live there. It feels like giving up." "Claire, sometimes you have to take a step back to move forward," I told her. "If moving in with his parents helps you get back on your feet, then that's what you need to do. It's not giving up. It's being practical." She didn't respond right away, and when she finally did, her tone was defensive. "You wouldn't understand. You've never had to go through this." I sighed. "Claire, I've made my share of mistakes, but I also learned from them. That's what you need to do. Learn and grow. I can't do it for you." A couple of weeks later, Claire and Jake moved into his parents' basement. According to Lily, things were tense between them and Jake's parents. His dad was frustrated with their lack of direction, and his mom was tired of cleaning up after them. One evening, Jake's dad called me. "Carter, I hate to bother you, but I'm at my wit's end with these two," he said. "They don't seem to realize how much work it takes to build a life together. They're still acting like teenagers." I felt a mix of frustration and sadness. "I get it," I said. "I tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. At this point, they have to figure it out on their own." Jake's dad sighed. "I just hope they figure it out before it's too late." As the months went by, things didn't improve. Claire and Jake were constantly arguing, and the financial strain was taking a toll on their relationship. One day, Claire called me crying. "Dad, I think Jake and I made a mistake," she said through her sobs. "What happened?" I asked, my heart sinking. "He's just not who I thought he was. He doesn't help around the house, and he spends all his time complaining about work. I feel like I'm doing everything on my own." I wanted to say, "I told you so," but I bit my tongue. Instead, I said, "Claire, marriage is hard. It takes effort from both people. Have you tried talking to him about how you're feeling?" "I've tried," she said, "but he doesn't listen. He just says I'm nagging him." For the first time, I heard doubt in her voice. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize the gravity of her decisions. Despite everything, Claire still hadn't apologized for banning me from her wedding, or for the way she'd treated me. Part of me wanted to let it go and focus on rebuilding our relationship, but another part of me couldn't forget how much her actions had hurt. One day, I brought it up during a phone call. "Claire, can we talk about the wedding?" I asked. "What about it?" she said, her tone defensive. "You banned me from one of the most important days of your life. Do you regret that?" There was a long pause before she answered. "I was angry," she admitted. "I felt like you didn't support me." "I was trying to protect you," I said. "I've always wanted what's best for you, even when it meant making tough decisions." She didn't respond, and I didn't push. I knew it would take time for her to fully understand the impact of her choices. As of now, Claire and I are in a better place than we were a few months ago. But things are far from perfect. She's still stubborn and proud, and I'm still struggling to find the balance between supporting her and letting her learn from her mistakes. Every day, I hope she'll come around and realize that I've always had her best interests at heart. But until then, I'm doing my best to be patient. Because that's what being a parent is. Loving your child even when they don't make it easy.